Hey everyone, this is Luke Johnson from Noetic, the humanities teaching app. Go download it for your iPhone and Android devices. Today, Jennifer Avery is back to continue her discussion of Jane Eyre. I believe we are on our 14th installment of this text. So what do you have in store for us today, Jennifer?
Okay, well, we left off with chapter 28, where Jane comes into contact with the Rivers family, which is St. John, Diana, and Mary, the brother and sisters. And they have taken her in because she was starving on the moor and she had nowhere to go, and so they took her in. And now Jane has been laying in bed for several days. I believe it's 3 days. And she and she goes into some of the words that she heard while she was out, basically while she was asleep. She said that she couldn't talk and she was barely conscious, but she did hear some of the conversation. And both Diana and Mary are very sweet to her, and they said, "Oh well, it's a good thing we took her in because she might have died, like if we had left her." And they start making conjectures about her. Well, I don't think she's uneducated. She seems like she's a fairly fine lady. Her hands don't look like they've been uh, uh, but they've been worked to the bone or anything like that. So she's not a servant. So this must be a lady. And they're trying to kind of figure out the mystery here because they're intrigued by it. And then here comes Sinjin, the lovely person here. Sinjin basically just says, well, she's probably out because she was so fatigued, and I doubt that we need to call a doctor. He's very matter of fact about everything. The only thing that he conjectures about her is that, well, she doesn't look like she's a vulgar or degraded person, so I guess she's okay. and so and so Sinjin is, you immediately see the difference between Sinjin and the sisters. The sisters are more like Jane. They're compassionate and they're trying to figure out her character and are interested by it. And Sinjin just sees her as somebody he's helping because he's supposed to. Uh, and um, and we get a and it's and we get a little bit more conversation and all that Sinjin can say is that, well, she looks like she's sensible, but she's not at all handsome. and That's pretty much all you get out of him. And then I believe she's the fourth day. Jane feels like she's doing a lot better. She could talk and rise in bed and turn around. And during this time, she's talking with Hannah, the housemaid. And Jane knows that the housemaid has a particular prejudice against her because the way that she treated her at the door is like, oh, you're a vagrant and you're up to no good and everything like that. And so Jane being Jane and understanding how to read a character and understanding why these things may exist between her and this person, she approaches it very delicately. Here's what, and again, here we have also some proof of Charlotte Bronte's sense of class. Uh, Although she's in the book, she's friendly to the staff and the servants, but there's, in her mind, obviously they're lower than somebody even like Jane. And here's a little bit of proof of that. She says Hannah was baking. Prejudice is well known, are most difficult to eradicate from the heart whose soil has never been loosened or fertilized by education. They grow there, firm as weeds among stones. Hannah had been cold and stiff indeed at the first. Latterly she had begun to relent a little, and when she saw me come in tidy and well dressed, she even smiled. And they go through this little bit of conversation, and Hannah is so like, oh, well, looks like you're doing better. Why don't you go ahead and sit on my chair? And she starts asking Jane questions. She asks her, did you ever go a begging afore you come here? I was indignant for a moment, but remembering that anger was out of the question, and that I had indeed appeared as a beggar to her, I answered quietly, but still not without a certain marked firmness. You are mistaken in supposing me a beggar. I am no beggar, any more than yourself or your young ladies. After a pause, she said, I do not understand that. You've like no house nor no brass, I guess. The want of house or brass, by which I suppose you mean money, does not make a beggar in your sense of the word. So, are you book learned? She inquired presently. Yes, very. But you've never been to boarding school. I was at a boarding school 8 years. She opened her eyes wide. Whatever cannot you keep yourself for then? I have kept myself, and I trust shall keep myself again. What are you going to do with those gooseberries? I inquired as she brought out a basket of the fruit. Make them into pies. Give them to me, and I'll pick them. And so here we have Hannah is basically showing her prejudice and saying, oh, well, why aren't you keeping yourself then? Why are you begging? And Jane but Jane, again, understanding the nature and the whys of how this woman thinks, she's delicate about it. She says, oh, well, I've earned my living before, and as a matter of fact, why don't I help you right now? But just to show her that I'm not above this, or to show her I'm not above this, and I don't intend to be a beggar. I want to work. I want to be useful. And of course, that wins Hannah over because she understood. And that's a big lesson I think I get from Jane Eyre is that Jane, she has some prejudices, it's true, but she she's compassionate and she's empathetic. She can put herself in the shoes of other people and learn how to not despise them or not dislike them because of their attitudes, because she tries to understand where that attitude came from in these people. And so I think that's an important takeaway from Jane Eyre as a whole, is this sense of how to be tactful and not hateful, which is a Helen Burns thing that she learned. Okay, and so she's established with Hannah now. And so she learns a little bit more about the family, the Rivers family, and she finds out that the mother died many years ago and the father had died just recently. And so we get the proof that the parson that wasn't at home when Jane was still out and about begging was Mr. Rivers, and now she's found him anyway. And so we find out the father's just died, and we find out that the two sisters are governesses. That's how they get their work, and St. John is, of course, the parson. Let me see here. And then we find out more from Hannah that although the Rivers family it's a very old name, and they come from money. They're gentry, but they're gentry that has fallen on hard times because someone here's this Mr. Sinja. Let me see. Wait, here it is. Let me find it. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Sorry. I've lost my spot. Okay, old Mr. Rivers, she said, was a plain man enough, but a gentleman, and of as ancient a family as could be found. Marsh End had belonged to the Rivers ever since it was a house, and Marsh End is the house that they're in. And it was, she affirmed, a boon 200-year old, for all it looked but a small, humble place, not to compare with Mr. Oliver's grand hall in Morton Vale, but she could remember Bill Oliver's father, a journeyman needlemaker, and the Rivers were gentry in the old days, or the Henrys, as anybody might see by looking into the registers in Morton Church. So they're gentry. She said the old master was like other folk, not much out of the common way, stark mad of shooting and farming and such like. The mistress was different. She was a great reader and studied a deal, and the bairns had taken after her. There was nothing like them in these parts, nor ever had been. They had liked learning, all three, almost from the time they could speak, and they had always been of a mark of their own. Mr. St. John, when he grew up, would go to college and be a parson, and the girls, as soon as they left school, would seek places as governesses, for they had told her their father had some years ago lost a great deal of money by a man he had trusted turning bankrupt. And as he was now not rich enough to give them fortunes, they must provide for themselves. They had lived very little at home for a long while, and were only come now to stay a few weeks on account of their father's death. But they did so like Marshand and Morton, and all these moors and hills about. They had been in London and many grand towns, but they always said there was no place like home. And then they were so agreeable with each other, never fell out nor threat, which means bickered. She did not know where there was such a family for being united. So we find out that despite these hardships, that the family is very close to one another, and even that they can't live at home because they don't have the money, they have to work. And so they can't visit their home very much. And this is something that happened a lot with the gentry at this time, when tradesmen were making all the money. And it's also it's related to how Rochester ended up with Bertha, and these arrangements between houses with lots of money who might be journeymen and houses that were old and had a big name. Um, but in any case, so we learned this about it, and we learned about this man who the father had trusted, and that's very important later on. Just we have to keep that in mind. And so Jane has a little bit more conversation with Hannah, and then the girls come in, and she begins to see a little bit more of their characters. She says that she really likes the sisters, that they are very much congenial, and they have a lot of the same tastes and enjoy a lot of the same things. And then we get a little description of St. John. So we hear all these wonderful things about the sisters, and then one of the things that she says about him is, had he been a statue instead of a man, he could not have been easier. He was young, perhaps from 28 to 30, tall, slender. His face riveted the eye. It was like a Greek face, very pure in outline, quite a straight classic nose, quite an Athenian mouth and chin. It is seldom indeed an English face comes so near the antique models as did his. He might well be a little shocked at the irregularity of my lineaments, his own being so harmonious. His eyes were blue, large and blue, with brown lashes. His high forehead, colorless as ivory, was partially streaked over by careless locks of fair hair. This is a gentle delineation, is it not, reader? Yet he whom it describes scarcely impressed one with the idea of a gentle, a yielding, an impressible, or even a placid nature. And she says this because that Roman kind of, handsomeness, that was often associated with, good nature. And so here she says, well, he has these features, but this is not who he is. Quiescent as he now sat, there was something about his nostril, his mouth, his brow, which to my perceptions indicated elements within, either restless or hard or eager. He did not speak to me one word, nor even direct to me one glance, till his sisters returned. Diana, as she passed in and out in the course of preparing tea, brought me a little cake, baked on the top of the oven. Eat that now, she said. You must be hungry. Hannah says you have had nothing but some gruel since breakfast. I did not refuse it, for my appetite was awakened and keen. Mr. Rivers now closed his book, approached the table, and as he took a seat, fixed his blue, pictorial-looking eyes full upon me. There was an unceremonious directness, a searching, decided steadfastness in his gaze now, which told me that intention and not diffidence had hitherto kept it averted from the stranger. You are very hungry, he said. I am, sir. It is my way. It always was my way by instinct, ever to meet the brief with brevity, the direct with plainness. So she's answering him back just good as she gets from him. And she can already tell that's probably the way to go with this guy, because even though he has all these favorable, attractive qualities, she says that there was something about him that was hard and restless, and we see more of that later on. She says later, and through this little scene, she describes him a little bit more. She says, St. John's eyes, though clear enough in a literal sense and a figurative one, were difficult to fathom. He seemed to use them rather as instruments to search other people's thoughts than as agents to reveal his own. The combination of keenness and reserve was considerably more calculated to embarrass than to encourage. So he's looking. So she the way she's describing is he's looking at people in this judgmental sort of way, and he looks at her in a judgmental sort of way. Which, who would that remind her of? Brocklehurst. And everything was embarrassment and shame and all of that, and she senses this in St. John right away. But you know, let me see.
So Jen, let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
And get your theory on this. So, why do we have these very opposite characters in Brocklehurst and Rochester, if we are going to say that they're opposites? Mm-hmm. And then we seem to have, after she's been with Rochester, kind of a reversion to something that she knew before. What do you think this trinity of male figures means for Bronte in Jane Eyre? Have you given a lot of thought to that? Because it doesn't. It seems like they exist upon some sort of continuum, which is, I suppose, interesting from character development standpoint. But I can't imagine that that's some sort of accident. What do you make of all of that?
I wouldn't think it's an accident at all. And the way I see it is that you have Brocklehurst, who is obviously the fire and brimstone, hateful, moneyed pastor. And you have Rochester,
and potentially immoral.
Very much potentially immoral. And then you have Rochester, who is in some ways immoral himself, but he admits to his faults, and he has a freer nature. He doesn't judge as quickly as he doesn't judge based on the same things that Brocklehurst judges upon. He judges on things that Jane judges upon, which are the things that are more intangible. Whereas Brocklehurst was just looking at a person's situation and how much money they had and who their parents were. That's all Brocklehurst was looking at. But like Jane, Rochester looks at essentials in people, the not where they came from or how much money they have, but who they are. And then you have St. John, who is perfect. He's perfect in almost every way. I mean, even though she says he's hard, he's still compassionate. He still helps her. He still gets her what she wants. And so she can't dislike him, even though he reminds her so much of Brocklehurst. So what I think this is sort of a perfect model physically and a perfect model morally. And this person is so intense and really self-centered in a way, because later on in some of his conversations with Jane, you get the sense that he's doing all of this good work for ministry and for the church, not because he wants to help people, but because he wants to get a good spot in heaven, because he wants to be remembered for his charity. And so this perfect person, in contrast with after the moral questionable the questionable moral decisions of Mr. Rochester, Jane is now faced with a morally perfect person, seemingly. But even that morally perfect person is not perfect.
So are you making the claim that St. is laying up treasures in heaven, that he, like, everything that he does is so that he can have a higher rank in God's army when the second coming comes, like that's everything that drives him? And I guess let's just say that is okay, because from what my understanding of biblical eschatology, that is and don't take look, I'm not a theologian, so double check what I'm saying, I'm just parroting what I've heard from other individuals, is that there might be some scriptural evidence that, individuals who save more souls or something like that for Christ attain a higher rank in this Armageddon army. Do you think he doesn't have real religion? Do you think he is relating incorrectly to God? Because I think it might be possible to have a pure love of God, but at the same time wanting to be closer to God in eternity, be a lieutenant in eternity, or something like that. I'm not sure that's how it works. I doubt that it does work that. I don't know I don't know how it works, but I guess I'm just saying. I don't know. I'm perhaps a little bit more sympathetic with St.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know. What do you think about all that?
I'm sure. I think that he does have genuine compassion about him, but I think that is outstripped by his ambition. He mentions his ambition several times, and he is ambitious to do more, to see more, and I think that even though he does have this genuine compassion, the ambition outstrips it. And I don't think he's wholly selfish in his religion. I think he does have true religion, but I think he's almost trying to make it a battle. He's so intense about it that you wonder if he resents it, if he resents his faith in some way. I don't know. It's strange. St. John is a very difficult character to place, but I know that he's got to be drawn from somebody Bronte knew. But even though like I said, even though he is ambitions, his religion's true, but it's a tool almost more than a belief.
Well, you mentioned that he might be drawn from somebody that Bronte knew.
Yeah.
It's been a while now since I've looked into the biography of this, but didn't I seem to recall something to the effect that Bronte may have had some romances with some of her, or at least infatuations with some of her instructors or something like that. And so I'm wondering if any of these men are mirrors of that male instruction or the infatuation or whatever that she had with certain people.
I think that they really could be, because and because she I think she married somebody who her father trained, who was also a pastor, and I think that it's my understanding that he had several students, and she probably saw these people waltz through, these characters stayed with her. Um, but I know as a writer myself, a lot of my male characters are based not necessarily on people I have relationships with, but on men that I have watched and been curious about, and types that I've seen that seem to be in abundance and things like that, and that's probably a little bit of what she's doing here too. Although I think she has somebody very particular in mind with Sinjin, because his character is so sophisticated. Is he good or is he bad? Is he a truly righteous man, or is he a self-righteous man? That's a question that never really gets answered. All we find out in the end that he is not the kind of man that Jane wants, because he's hard. He doesn't have that softness of sensibility, or that sensitivity, you might even say, that Rochester does. He's all action and what he can. He's all accomplishment rather than personality.
He's very shiny, right? He's
shiny, yeah. He's a gorgeous man. He's shiny as a new dime. This feller, and again, and I think it's also a way to show that Jane is not impressed by shiny things. Jane is impressed by more fundamental things, and so the shiny man, bless his heart, he tries. He tries as much as he can try.
Well, it's hard to discern the nature of Sinjin's character, and maybe it'll become revealed as we go through about some of the interactions, right? Mm-hmm. The thing about him, as I recall from this chapter, or this interaction with the sisters in St. John, is that he was just very rigid, right? Mm-hmm. So he's there seemed to be not a lot of room for understanding.
Yeah.
But which I think can stem from an obsession with one's righteousness. But I don't know. I'd be hard pressed to say that he was a bad man.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that he's a bad man either. He's not. It's just not. Like every man in the world, he's not a perfect man, although he may appear to be in some way, or a man like that could appear to be to some people in Bronte society, and like everything else, she likes to set those preconceptions on their ear. Yeah. And she does it subtly, as because back in that day, anything more extreme would have probably sent her to the stake or something.
I wonder if they represent different stages of man. Like, how old is Sinjin? Do we know?
Sinjin she says that he's about 20, anywhere between 28 and 30, and Rochester's about 35.
35 or 37, and then Rochester, or then Brocklehurst is
like 50s, 60s. Yeah, he's an older man.
But I think maybe if we look at it in terms of age, there might be something there, because Sinjin, is idealistic, rigid, hasn't maybe encountered as much life as Rochester. Mm-hmm. Rochester may have started out in a similar position as Sinjin in terms of his ideals about the world, and then the world answered back, right? Yeah. And he got a less than ideal scenario, and so his personality has been sort of broken down, which allows for him to perhaps be a more understanding individual. The bad news is, if they are also representative of different age constructs, we hope that Rochester doesn't turn into a Brocklehurst. It's fine for us to think about Sinjin progressing into a Rochester, because there seems to be some emotional understanding. But Well, then if it all goes to pot in the end, what's the whole point of the progress, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's some truth in what you're saying. I mean, by the same token, you could use Adele and Jane as and Mrs. Fairfax as
Totally, totally.
representative of different ages of women, and I think that's true to some degree. Uh, because yeah, like Sinj, I could see St. John turning into a Brocklehurst way before I could see Rochester turning into a Brocklehurst.
Maybe he skips the Rochester phase and goes
Yeah,
straight to
well,
Brocklehurst.
yeah, see, and that's what I think it is. But also fundamentally, Rochester has a more open character. He's more. He's not as rigid. He's not as taciturn and uh, uh, and cold. He's a warmer individual. Uh, and Brocklehurst probably is as cold gets, and that's not a far stretch from St. John. Although again, St. John is by at this point in his life seems to be a better person than he's probably going to turn out better than Brocklehurst.
We'll see. Mm.
But it's interesting because I mean all of it's the same thing happens. It has happened throughout human history. Uh, the way that we age and the things that happen to us are what creates us. And this is also another reason why Jane Eyre is so important. That expression of the self was very rare in English literature at this point in time. And she delved into every aspect of what makes a person who they are. And that was unheard of back in those days. And so she really kind of got people in touch with who they are and why they're who they are. Because Jane, the character, so easily can almost predict who people are and what they're going to do. But anyway, I have that, and I think that all of these characters are representative of some faction of life that she was familiar with, that she wanted to kind of conjecture what may have made these people that way. But anyway, that's something that I'm speaking as a writer myself, and that's some of what I do. Is some of my characters come from people I've seen. I went, what happened to this person to make them this way? And I think that's happened with Charlotte Bronte, and it does with every writer. But in any case, I guess I don't know if that answered any question whatsoever, but but in any case, I guess we can go on from there. Let me see. Oh, and of course, and it's funny because Jane and St. John kind of have a little bit of an exchange here, and he's trying to figure her out, and she's kind of, and he's trying to figure out what she wants. He says he asked Jane, "Where did you last reside?" And Mary says, "Well, you are too inquisitive, St. John," murmured Mary in a low voice. But he leaned over the table and required an answer by a second firm and piercing look. "The name of the place where and of the person with whom I lived is my secret," I replied concisely, "which, if you like, you have, in my opinion, a right to keep, both from St. John and every other questioner," remarked Diana. "Yet if I know nothing about you or your history, I cannot help you," he said. "And you need help, do you not?" "I need it, and I seek it. So far, sir, that some true philanthropist will put me in the way of getting work which I can do, and the remuneration for which will keep me, if but in the barest necessities of life. I know not whether I am a true philanthropist, yet I am willing to aid you to the utmost of my power in a purpose so honest. First, then, tell me what you have been accustomed to do and what you can do." And then Jane just busts out everything. She says, "Mr. Rivers," I said, turning to him and looking at him as he looked at me, openly and without diffidence, You and your sisters have done me a great service, the greatest man can do a fellow being. You have rescued me by your noble hospitality from death. This benefit conferred gives you an unlimited claim on my gratitude, and a claim, to a certain extent, on my confidence. I will tell you as much of the history of the wanderer you have harbored as I can tell without compromising my own peace of mind, my own security, moral and physically, and that of others. And then she tells him her whole story. And I love this speech of hers because it's okay. Because you're helping me out, I'm going to tell you I'm going to tell you some of what's happened to me, but I'm going to do it on my terms. and and that's basically what she's doing here, is setting up the terms and then going right ahead and not even asking if he agrees to the terms. So she goes on and tells her history, and then of course after she tells him about Lowood and Brocklehurst, uh, St. John says, "Oh, I have heard of Mr. Brocklehurst, and I have seen the school," so they know each other. And then she continues to go on about. She goes on. Okay, she goes on to talk a little bit more about after leaving the school. She says, "This place I would." She's talking about Thornwood. She says, "I obtained a good situation and was happy. This place I was obliged to leave 4 days before I came here. The reason of my departure I cannot and ought not explain. It would be useless, dangerous, and would sound incredible. No blame attached to me. I am as free from culpability as any one of you three. Miserable I am, and must be for a time, for the catastrophe which drove me from a house I had found a paradise was of a strange and direful nature. I observed but 2 points in planning my departure: speed, secrecy. To secure these, I had to leave behind me everything I possessed, except a small parcel, which in my hurry and trouble of mind I forgot to take out of the coach that brought me to Whitcross." And then she goes on, and she's telling him, she's telling him the truth, but not telling him everything. And like I said, she's doing it on her terms. And then Diana, this one of the sisters, asked St. John not to try, don't make her talk anymore, man. I mean, she's told you everything you need to know. And she had given the name Jane Elliott, and Rivers already knows that that's not her real name. And she tells him, well, this is my name right now, because if I fear discovery above all things, and whatever disclosure would lead to it, I avoid. So she's not telling him name because she's afraid to. And before St. John can kind of butt in more, Diana stops him. Tries to stop him, and kind of say, "No, leave her at peace, leave her in peace." But he keeps going. And then and basically he gets from her is like, "Look, I used to be a teacher. If you could find me anything I can do, you let me know, and I'll let you know, and I'll see what I can do for you." And that's pretty much the end of it. And she even says, "Oh, here we go. My sisters, you see how." Oh, wait a minute. Okay, she says, "You would not like to be long dependent on our hospitality. You would wish, I see, to dispense as soon as may be with my sister's compassion, and above all with my charity. I am quite sensible of the distinction drawn, nor do I resent it. It is just. You desire to be independent of us. I do. I have already said so. Show me how to work, or how to seek work. That is all I now ask. Then let me go, if it be but to the meanest cottage. But till then, allow me to stay here. I dread another essay of the horrors of homeless destitution." "Indeed, you shall stay here," said Diana, putting her white hand on my head. "You shall," repeated Mary, in the tone of undemonstrative sincerity, which seemed natural to her. "My sisters, you see, have a pleasure in keeping you," said Mr. St. John, "as they would have pleasure in keeping and cherishing a half-frozen bird some wintry wind might have driven through their casement. I feel more inclination to put you in the way of keeping yourself, and shall endeavor to do so. But observe, my sphere is narrow. I am but the incumbent of a poor country parish. My aid must be of the humblest sort. And if you are inclined to despise the day of small things, seek some more efficient succor than such as I can offer. She has already said that she is willing to do anything honest she can do, answered Diana for me. And you know, St. John, she has no choice of helpers. She is forced to put up with such crusty people as you. I will be a dressmaker. I will be a plain workwoman. I will be a servant, a nurse girl, if I can be no better, I answered. Right, said Mr. St. John, quite coolly. If such is your spirit, I promise to aid you in my own time and way. He now resumed the book with which he had been occupied before tea. I soon withdrew, for I had talked as much and sat up as long as my present strength would permit. So just talking to this dude has worn poor Jane out, because she knows that, and the sisters are trying to kind of help, like kind of soften St. John up a little bit, but he's relentless. You can see that he's trying to make sure that she's honest about what she's asking for, and in a way that's understandable. But Jane is answering perfectly to these inquiries, because he's being kind of tough and saying, "Well, are you sure you're willing to do anything? Are you sure you don't want charity? Are you sure that you want to work? Because I don't know a lot of positions I can put you in, but I'll put you in something that will help you, but it's not going to be great." And so he's just making sure that she's going to do what she says. And again, Jane is answering as, the best way she can. She says, "I'll do anything." But he still says, "Well, if such is your spirit, I promise to aid you in my own time and way." Just like she told him her history on her terms, he's going to find her work on his terms. And so you see that two wills kind of already aligned against each other in a way, like two really strong wills. And so that brings us to chapter 30, which is next. And chapter 30, basically, you get a sense of of how her life is with Diana and Mary, and they apparently spend a lot of time studying, and they take a lot of walks. And she talks about how the girls really love to be outside and love to really embrace all the beauty around them. And then she says of St. John, she says, "As to Mr. St. John, the intimacy which had arisen so naturally and rapidly between me and his sisters did not extend to him. One reason of the distance yet observed between us was that he was comparatively seldom at home. A large proportion of his time appeared devoted to visiting the sick and poor among the scattered population of the parish. No weather seemed to hinder him in these pastoral excursions. Rain or fair, he would, when his hours of morning study were over, take his hat, and, followed by his father's old pointer, Carlo, go out on his mission of love or duty. I scarcely know in which light he regarded it. Sometimes, when the day was very unfavorable, his sisters would expostulate. He would then say, with a peculiar smile, more solemn than cheerful, "And if I let a gust of wind or sprinkling of rain turn me aside from these easy tasks, what preparation should such sloth be for the future I propose to myself?" So he's doing everything for the future. He's like, "I'm not going to be lazy, because I want to deserve this future that I have in mind," which is the missionary, of course. But she said, and then she goes on about St. John, about the differences between him and the sisters, and between him and Jane, really. He says, besides his frequent absences, there was another barrier to friendship with him. He seemed of a reserved and abstracted and even a brooding nature. Zealous in his ministerial labors, blameless in his life and habits, he yet did not appear to enjoy that mental serenity, that inward content, which should be the reward of every sincere Christian and practical philanthropist. Often of an evening, when he sat at the window, his desk and papers before him, he would cease reading or writing, rest his chin on his hand, and deliver himself up to I know not what course of thought. But that it was perturbed and exciting might be seen in the frequent flash and changeful dilation of his eye. I think, moreover, that nature was not to him that treasury of delight it was to his sisters. He expressed once, and but once, in my hearing, a strong sense of the rugged charm of the hills, and an inborn affection for the dark roof and hoary walls he called his home. But there was more of gloom than pleasure in the tone and words in which the sentiment was manifested, and never did he seem to roam the moors for the sake of their soothing silence, never seek out or dwell upon the thousand peaceful delights they could yield. So she's basically saying that that he seems almost trapped by himself, that nothing brings him any pleasure. She seems to feel like he's never really happy. The only thing that matters to him is serving, serving, serving. And because and she said, it's interesting here, she said, he did not appear to enjoy that mental serenity, that inward content, which should be the reward of every sincere Christian and practical philanthropist. So she says that he's not getting the enjoyment that she feels a true Christian would get from doing good deeds. And so there's a hint at the ambition right there. It's like it's all for the future. It's not for the sake. I'm not happy doing this. I'm not happy just helping people here. I have to help more people, different people. I have to be somewhere else. I have to earn my place. And that's something that she says is a barrier, because Jane, if you think about Jane's character, she's not ambitious. She's happy in the simplest things, and she even admits to it several times, saying, "Well, I'll be a dressmaker. I just want to be able to keep myself. I just want to be able to eat and have some time to do what I like to do." But St. John needs more than that. So a little bit, and she's oh, here we go. And then she goes on to discuss. She says she goes to the church at Morton and she listens to one of his sermons. And here's how she describes his sermon. It began calm, and indeed, as far as delivery and pitch of voice went, it was calm to the end. An earnestly felt, yet strictly restrained zeal breathed soon in the distinct accents, and prompted the nervous language. And by nervous, she means strong, vigorous, passionate. This grew to force, compressed, condensed, controlled. The heart was thrilled, the mind astonished by the power of the preacher. Neither were softened. Throughout there was a strange bitterness, an absence of consolatory gentleness, stern allusions to Calvinistic doctrines, election, predestination, reprobation, and these all refer to God's predetermination of salvation and damnation, which means that basically bad blood goes to hell, good blood goes to heaven. And there's a big mark against St. John, because remember, Helen Burns taught Jane that idea of universal salvation. It doesn't depend on blood. It depends on what you do while you're here. But St. John is talking about these doctrines that favor that the minute you're born, you're predetermined to go either to hell or to heaven.
You're trying to get me to bite on this one.
Huh?
Did you try to get me to bite on this one?
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't yet. But
I still want to qualify that Helen Burns might be a type of universal salvation.
Okay.
So so maybe it's best to think about it in terms of, say there is a book of life where everybody's name is automatically written into that book of life, right? so that it's offered universally in that way. Not unlike, say, if someone were to reserve hotel rooms for us all, right?
Yeah.
But not everybody shows up to claim the
Yeah.
reservation.
Yeah.
And so that names are eventually blotted out of that.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
and what I would, so maybe the way to think about the Helen Burns universal salvation is that it's freely given to everybody and it's universal in that respect. But
Mhm.
then there is, but you still have to earn it. You still have
Yeah.
to show up. You still have to claim that. Then you don't just
Yeah.
automatically get it. So there's still some effort that you have to do. But I think it's very interesting to think about the predestinarian model, specifically with how it comports with understandings of the reality of the future, right?
Yeah.
So something I talked to Jennifer off camera about earlier, and a lot of people who listen to a lot of the seminars lately have been really preoccupied with high particle physics and stuff like that. And a lot of space-time is, a lot of physicists think of space-time as being just kind of already existent, right? And so where we are in that thing determines a lot of our perception of it. If we're further along in the space-time, something seems like the present, where it is would be the past of somebody else, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
If that's in fact how things are, and God can see that massive block of space-time, it might there might be a compatibilist sort of option where God knows the future as well as he does the past, because they're equally solid and real in that space-time. But there's also this sense that we can't know it, so we have to continue to act as if we can earn it.
Yeah.
So there's a way to make all these views mix and also to make them more complicated. So I just want to throw some philosophical stuff out there on that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and you're right though about Helen Burns's idea of universal salvation is like she's not. It's not a lazy sort of thing. It's like you're working, and Jane feels that way too. But when she talks about Calvinistic doctrines, and you're this philosopher. I don't know a whole lot about Calvin, but that's what led a lot of the same ideas led the Roundheads, your Oliver Cromwell's, the Puritans, and those did kind of favor salvation of higher classes and
Right.
not lower classes.
The elect, the
Yeah, the
144,000,
elect.
something of that
Yes.
effect, right?
It's similar to Manifest Destiny, because we're so awesome, we deserve this. You know.
Well, that would be the great sin of it, right? Is
Yeah.
that, let's just say there was a, I mean, I get, it would be a sure sign that you aren't predestined for the salvation of God if you start acting in such a way that would be ungodly.
Yeah.
If you were to believe that you had already been saved so that you could go out and oppress other people.
Yeah.
That would
Exactly.
be that would be actually pretty telling that you're not part of the elect. You may just think it.
Yeah.
But there's there's other stuff you want to think about time and stuff like that with these predestination models and stuff like that, is that it could be the case that what we consider to be reality, human space-time, it may not be set. It may not be this massive chunk of past, present, and future that can be viewed at once from eternity. But that's not to say that there isn't a hyper time, that there isn't a time, God's time, where certain events will supervene on the human reality, no matter what shape that it takes. So, like, let's say there are unlimited paths that we could take into the future. It still may be the case that certain events are unalterable and must obtain. Is there a reality in, say, 3 BC or whenever Jesus was born, where he wasn't crucified?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That might be one of those. That might be one of those hypertime God events. Regardless of what path happens, Jesus is going to get nailed to the cross.
Yeah.
Regardless of whatever choices are made, whatever interactions that the humans have. That's a really interesting thing to think about, is that, well, if one time is uncertain, another time may be certain. So It's just
Very
fun
fun.
things to think about.
Oh yeah, indeed, indeed. But like I say, in Jane, in poor Jane's world, I'm afraid blood is what matters.
Mm.
And a lot of these ideas were just starting at this point in history that we now really, you know, that we see as a given, that we take for granted. These ideas of a more equal religion, which you could argue is still doesn't exist, but
You mean like Enlightenment ideas? Is that what you mean?
yeah, like as in the ideas that started the American Revolution. Every man is created equal.
Yeah.
Yeah, those sorts of ideas were just starting to really come to the fore at this time period, and it was, again, like I said, it wasn't a given though yet. It was just, they were just new ideas.
Well,
Uh,
even in their implementation, they weren't done correctly, right?
exactly.
Because obviously those new republics with those ideas were suppressing other
Yes.
individuals that they deemed to be unequal. So, obviously in America we had slavery, and in France you had they were chopping people's heads off.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. But that's but that's all kind of part of that way of thinking. All this coming together, and that she represents in this story with these different characters. But she says that these doctrines that we've been talking about, these Calvinistic doctrines, were frequent, and each reference to these points sounded like a sentence pronounced for doom. When he had done, instead of feeling better, calmer, more enlightened by his discourse, I experienced an inexpressible sadness, for it seemed to me, I know not whether equally so to others, that the eloquence to which I had been listening had sprung from a depth where lay turbid dregs of disappointment, where moved troubling pulses of insatiate yearnings and disquieting aspirations. I was sure St. John Rivers, pure-lived, conscientious, zealous as he was, had not yet found that peace of God which passeth all understanding. He had no more found it, I thought, than had I, with my concealed and racking regrets for my broken idol and lost Elysium, regrets to which I have latterly avoided referring, but which possess me and tyrannize over me ruthlessly. So she says that when he gives a sermon, she doesn't feel better because she can tell that he's not comforted by his faith that seems so thorough. It's
Well,
not making him happy. And when a preacher preaches a sermon like that, then I imagine it would be easy to tell to somebody like Jane, because if it doesn't make you feel better, this person is basically giving you the fire and brimstone, and that's what I think. That's what a lot of people had a problem with in the fire and brimstone was it was love of God out of fear, not love of God for love of God. And
now you're gonna get me to bite again.
oh.
Now I understand that, right?
Yeah.
Because right, you don't want to. What kind of love can you really have if you're afraid of somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like loving a executioner or you're loving a dictator or something like that. But I will say, there's a baby in the bathwater sort of approach. We have sort of embraced the Jesus Christ superstar form of religion in modern contemporary America, where like everything's cool, man, or whatever. It just be spiritual, and that doesn't. You see a lot of people are in unbelief, right? Um, I think there might be something to be said about the the expression fear is the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So although, I mean, there are obvious excesses to it. I want to make the case that there could be something sobering about a God that is keeping score.
Yeah.
But I, and the other thing I wanted to say is I think you were very astute to point out that Sitchin, maybe at his young age of 28, has not made that full conversion because there's that restlessness to him because he's so dang ambitious,
Mm-hmm.
right? That he doesn't seem, and Jane's picking up on the fact, and probably better than anyone else, that he doesn't seem to have gone through that full transformation. And to be honest, at 28, like, what do you know at 28? Like, you don't,
Yeah.
you don't, I mean,
Well, back in
I
those
know,
days,
I mean,
they
I
knew a
mean,
great
life
deal
was
more than
hard.
we did.
Yeah, true. Like, I mean, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, you're still a rather young man, right? And it's still possible that at 28 that he could have been fairly well protected in a
Yeah.
seminary and money. And I don't know his whole backstory, but I think it's right for Jane to point out that this obsession with being busy, this obsession with spiritual ambition, like winning souls for Christ and mission trips and stuff like that, might point to the fact that you have not made your peace with God.
Yeah.
And that you're going through the wrong. Now, we don't want to tamp down people who do good missionary work, but it's also the other expression from the Bible is that faith without or works without faith is dead, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
If you're constantly just doing what you believe to be good works and there's not this real beautiful faith behind it, then
Yeah, you could
there's something
even
mechanistic about it.
Yeah, you could even argue that maybe St. John feels this need to bring souls to God, to fill his own doubt, to make up for that doubt.
Yes.
And so that's why and one of the first
maybe it's like an incomplete atonement. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you've excited me with your idea. Maybe somewhere deep in his psychology, he's saying to himself, well, if I win enough souls to Christ, he'll go easier on me.
Yeah.
Because maybe there's some secret reason why Sitchin hasn't made the full transformation. Maybe there's something he's holding on to that we don't know. I mean, it's pure speculation, but this is feeding into some work that I did earlier today with Bob Schott on Kierkegaard. And so there's a little bit of bleed over between the two. And maybe so there's an incomplete cleavage between what God demands of us and what we really want. And maybe he's trying to make up the difference with all this activity.
He even says later on, to add to that point, he even says later on that at first, when he first entered the ministry, that he was dissatisfied with it, that he was restless, and so that could be the seed of that. It's like almost I want to kill myself out of guilt because I regret doing this, but I shouldn't regret doing this. It's
like the self-flagellation stuff that you would see in, like, he's not lacerating himself with some sort of whip or whatever, but he is willing to put himself in harm's way in India, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, at some point they start to become kind of equal.
Yeah, and St. John, he this is why the first couple of times I read Jane Eyre, I was just like, oh great, now the St. John stuff. I don't like St. John. Why do I need to read this? But when I stick through that part, because the more you read it, the more you realize that St. John is a very interesting, complex character.
Yes, he is.
And you get more of that a little bit later on in the chapter when I think it's that chapter. Well, Miss Oliver comes along, a woman that he's in love with, but he says that he abhors it, that the feeling is unnatural to him, this love that he has for Miss Oliver. And it's just like, dude, what happened to you? What did your mama do to you when you were a kid? And it's just one of those things that it makes him so interesting. It's hard to guess his true motivation. And and I think that that's part of why Jane really keeps an eye on him, because she's fascinated by him. He's hard to figure out. And I'm the same way. I find people who are hard to figure out a lot more interesting, and I tend to spend more time with those people. As I can understand it. But in any case, I say she's oppressed by this sermon because of all these reasons we've been talking about. Maybe he doubts, maybe he feels guilty, any possibility here. But she doesn't proclaim herself to be better than him. She says that he had not yet found that peace of God with passeth all understanding. He had no more found it, I thought, than had I, with my concealed and racking regrets for my broken idol and lost Elysium. So they have regret in common. And that's another reason why I think she feels in some way connected to St. John despite his coldness, is they both have these regrets, and neither one of them is exactly comfortable in their faith at the moment. And so she, and by the time several chapters later, she almost is willing to do the same thing to make up for that lack of faith or that doubted faith that St. John does. She's almost willing to go and be a missionary with him. But in any case, so we have this sermon, and we find out a little bit later that Diana and Mary were supposed to be going back to their jobs as governesses soon, and St. John had to go back to his parish and go back to his own house and be the pastor of the town. And so the house is about to get shut up, and at this point, St. John talks to Jane about a possibility he has for her, about running a school. Mr. Oliver, who owns a needle factory and is the only rich person in this area, Mr. Oliver, and he's going to start a school. He and Mr. Rivers has started a school for boys, and now they're wanting to start a school for girls. And so, okay, well, you can be the teacher of this school. But St. John is kind of cagey about telling her about it, because he thinks that she's going to think it's below her. He says, and since I am myself pure and obscure, I can offer you but a service of poverty and obscurity. You may even think it degrading. For I see now your habits have been what the world calls refined. Your tastes lean to the ideal, and your society has at least been among the educated. But I consider that no service degrades which can better our race. I hold that the more arid and unreclaimed the soil where the Christian's laborer's task of tillage is appointed him, the scantier the meed his toil brings, the higher the honor. His, under such circumstances, is the destiny of the pioneer, and the first pioneers of the gospel were the apostles. Their captain was Jesus, the Redeemer himself. Well, I said, as he again paused, proceed. So he's basically saying that this is poor work, and you might think it's beneath you, but I think that the harder the work and the less you get out of it, the greater the reward, the greater the spiritual reward. And so he's even like he's putting her into the same situation that he would like to be in himself. It's like, you're not, this isn't going to be very fulfilling, and you're going to have to work really hard, but it's going to be better for you in the long run that you're doing this. And Jane is defiant about this attitude. She's like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be happy about it. and that's what, and it's interesting to me how that works with them. Is like he think St. John says that she might find it degrading, because St. John himself would find it degrading, but not but and because he finds it degrading, he feels like it's more worth the doing because the reward will be the higher. But Jane, on the other hand, is going to make the best out of any situation, and there's another key difference between them. She's like, this might not make you happy, but this might make me happy. Um, and So he goes on. He says, I believe you will accept the post I offer you, and hold it for a while, not permanently, though, any more than I could permanently keep the narrow and narrowing, the tranquil hidden office of English country incumbent, for in your nature is an alloy of as detrimental to repose as that in mine, though of a different kind. Do explain, I urged, when he halted once more. I will, and you shall hear how poor the proposal is, how trivial, how cramping. I shall not stay long at Morton, now that my father is dead, and that I am my own master. I shall leave the place probably in the course of a 12-month. But while I do stay, I will exert myself to the utmost for its improvement. Morton, which I came to it when I came to it 2 years ago, had no school. And then he goes on about describing the school, and he asks her if she wants to be the mistress. And about this, she says he put the question rather hurriedly. He seemed half to expect an indignant or at least a disdainful rejection of the offer. Not knowing all my thoughts and feelings, though guessing some, he could not tell in what light the lot would appear to me. In truth, it was humble, but then it was sheltered, and I wanted a safe asylum. It was plotting, but then, compared with that of a governess in a rich house, it was independent, and the fear of servitude with strangers entered my soul like iron. It was not ignoble, not unworthy, not mentally degrading. I made my decision. I thank you for the proposal, Mr. Rivers, and I accept it with all my heart. And so she says it sounds like a good idea because it's going to be sheltered and because it's going to be obscure. Because even though she's not, she even though she might be more comfortable as a governess in some rich person's house, she knows that she knows that she can be more independent if she's in this school running it by herself, and she's the only one in the house, and she's teaching students who are in that society of no consequence beyond the work they can do with their hands, uh, and um, and so that makes her feel safer. And in a way, it's a little bit uppity of her, I think, but in another, she's still wants to do good for these people. Um, but in any case, and Mr. River, and she accepts it, and Mr. Rivers again is basically saying, this isn't going to be exactly a cakewalk here. He says, but you comprehend me, he said. It is a village school. Your scholars will be only poor girls, cottagers' children, at the best farmers' daughters. Knitting, sewing, reading, writing, ciphering will be all you will have to teach. What will you do with your accomplishments? What with the largest portion of your mind, sentiments, tastes? Save them till they are wanted. They will keep. You know what you undertake, then? I do. He now smiled, and not a bitter or a sad smile, but one well pleased and deeply gratified. And when will you commence the exercise of your function? I will go to my house tomorrow and open the school, if you like, next week. And so, and then after this, he's pretty happy that she's accepted this idea, because maybe he thought that she would feel herself above it, but because he sees that she doesn't, he's happy about it. But then she says, he rose and walked through the room. Standing still, he again looked at me. He shook his head. What do you disapprove of, Mr. Rivers? I asked. You will not stay at Morton long. No, no. Why, what is your reason for saying so? I read it in your eye. It is not of that description which promises the maintenance of an even tenor in life. I am not ambitious. He started at the word ambitious. He repeated, "No. What made you think of ambition? Who is ambitious? I know I am, but how did you find it out?" "I was speaking of myself." "Well, if you are not ambitious, you are." He paused. "What?" "I was going to say impassioned, but perhaps you would have misunderstood the word and been displeased. I mean that human affections and sympathies have a most powerful hold on you. I am sure you cannot long be content to pass your leisure in solitude, and to devote your working hours to a monotonous labor wholly void of stimulus, any more than I can be content," he added with emphasis, "to live here buried in morass, pent in with mountain. My nature that God gave me contravened, my faculties heaven bestowed paralyzed, made useless. You hear now how I contradict myself. I who preached contentment with a humble lot, and justified the vocation even of hewers of wood and drawers of water in God's service. I, his ordained minister, almost rave in my restlessness. Well, propensities and principles must be reconciled by some means." So we get a little, he kind of lets her in on the secret of himself a little bit here. He's like, we're kind of the same. As he says, "You're impassioned." It's not the same as being ambitious, but he knows, he senses the restlessness that she has. It's very much like his restlessness, and so he's confused as to why she wants to take this post. And so maybe it makes him a little bit more suspicious of Jane and why she's there and who she left. But at the same time, he's happy to have her, but he's convinced she's not going to stay long. And in the long run, he actually turns out being right. And so more weirdness from Sinjin here is that his relationship with Jane, although they're a little bit at odds, they're also very similar to each other. It's not just the Jane and it's not just the Brocklehurst and Sinjin thing. It's also a Jane and Sinjin thing that kind of exists here. And that would probably freak me out if I saw a similarity between myself and somebody who reminds me of somebody I never really liked, you know? And so I think that's part of the complexity of this part of the book as well, is this odd relationship between Jane and Sinjin, and that similarity but opposite kind of sense of each other. But in any case, and we find out a little bit more after all of this. He leaves the room, and Diana and Mary come back in, and she gets a little bit more from them. Diana says he will sacrifice all to his long-framed resolve, she said. Natural affection and feelings more potent still. Sinjin looks quiet, Jane, but he hides a fever in his vitals. You would think him gentle, yet in some things he is inexorable as death. And the worst of it is, my conscience will hardly permit me to dissuade him from his severe decision. Certainly I cannot for a moment blame him for it. It is right, noble, Christian, yet it breaks my heart. And the tears gushed to her fine eyes. Mary bent her head low over her work. We are now without father. We shall soon be without home and brother, she murmured. So the sisters, moreover, another cost to Sinjin's ambition is his sisters. When he goes on to be a missionary, he's going to be leaving them behind with nobody, because in this society, the father or the older brother protects the unmarried woman, and without their brother around, they would feel a little exposed and a little bit alone. And so the sisters are concerned about him going to be a missionary too, and they also seem to be questioning his motivation about it. So Jane is a little bit she's satisfied a little bit by what she was beginning to think about him anyway. She gets a little bit of a confirmation. Um, and then in the middle of all this, the Rivers get a letter. They get a letter from they get a letter. It says we get a little mysterious thing. He threw a letter. He says, "Our Uncle John is dead," said he. Both the sisters seemed struck, not shocked or appalled. The tidings appeared in their eyes rather momentous than afflicting. So they're not sad, but it's caused a reaction. Dead, repeated Diana. Yes, she riveted a searching gaze on her brother's face. And what then? She demanded in a low voice. What then, Di? He replied, maintaining a marble immobility of feature. What then? Why, nothing. Read. He threw a letter into her lap. She glanced over it and handed it to Mary. Mary perused it in silence and returned it to her brother. All three looked at each other, and all three smiled, a dreary, pensive smile enough. Amen. We can yet live, said Diana at last. At any rate, it makes us no worse off than we were before, remarked Mary. Only it forces rather strongly on the mind the picture of what might have been, said Mr. Rivers, and contrasts it somewhat too vividly with what is. So something has made them unhappy about this letter, and it's not that their uncle is dead. And of course, Diana can imagine what it's like for Jane to see this conversation. And she says, Jane, you will wonder at us and our mysteries, she said, and think us hard-hearted beings not to be more moved at the death of so near a relation as an uncle. But we have never seen him or known him. He was my mother's brother. Her father and he quarreled long ago. It was by his advice that my father risked most of his property in the speculation that ruined him. Mutual recriminations passed between them. They parted in anger and were never reconciled. My uncle and Ray engaged afterward in more prosperous undertakings. It appears he realized a fortune of £20,000. He was never married and had no near kindred but ourselves and one other person, not more closely related than we. My father always cherished the idea that he would atone for his error by leaving his possessions to us. That letter informs us that he has bequeathed every penny to the other relation, with the exception of 30 guineas to be divided between St. John, Diana, and Mary Rivers for the purchase of 3 mourning rings. He had a right, of course, to do as he pleased, and yet a momentary damp is cast on the spirits by the receipt of such news. Mary and I would have esteemed ourselves rich with £1,000 each, and to St. John such a sum would have been valuable for the good it would have enabled him to do. And so we had heard a little bit from Hannah about a man that they knew that kind of bankrupted the Rivers' father. And then we get this letter from an uncle. And it all sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? This guy had no relations. He never married and he had no kids. And he only had this one other relation other than us. And he made a fortune somewhere. And so it sounds like, and of course it doesn't come to light yet. But we get this information, and you can see the disappointment that comes from the laws, from estate laws in England at this time. The father lost all of his money because of this person, and the father thinks, well, maybe he'll make it up to me when he dies, and he'll leave some money to my kids since he doesn't have any kids, and because he kind of screwed me over. And then they're brought up believing that this may happen. And then all of a sudden they find out that this person they don't even know has never had any dealing with the uncle before, has gotten all the money. And they get 30 guineas, which is like probably $10 a piece, to buy mourning rings. And so that's a slap in the face, and you can understand why they're so grave at this news. And I said money was such an important thing, because if the women had gotten £1,000 each, then they might have found husbands that would have raised them up a little bit and given them more comfort and money. And St. John could have gone ahead and done his missionary work, or he could put it into his own parish. The sisters, of course, we got it. We get a sense from the sisters that they would rather him put his money into the parish and stay put. But so this is how the chapter ends, with this uncle who has passed away, and Jane in the middle of all of it and saying, well, okay. But and then we find out later, of course, that it's also her uncle, which is a little bit of God in the machine there, in my opinion, of the story. But we'll get to that next time, I guess. That brings us to the end of chapter 30. And
fantastic job, Jennifer. It was a really great discussion today. I learned a lot.
Me too.
Everybody just download the Noetic app, and yeah, I can't say enough about how lucky we are to have Jennifer walk us through this very difficult text. So, yeah, we'll just do this again next week, okay?
Right.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.